Something strange is happening behind the scenes and fans are starting to notice. After years of silence, tension, and public fallout, whispers are getting louder that Johnny Depp and Disney might be heading towards something no one expected: an apology. But is this really about fixing the past, or is there a bigger move tied to Pirates of the Caribbean 6? Insiders, past interviews, and subtle studio signals are painting a very different picture than what's being said publicly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The moment people started noticing the shift wasn't through any official announcement. It was through silence breaking in very calculated ways. For years, Johnny Depp had been completely absent from anything related to Pirates of the Caribbean, and Disney made it very clear back then that they were moving forward without him. That decision wasn't hidden. It was public, and it came at a time when controversy around him was dominating headlines. But here is where things start getting interesting. Because what was once a firm no-return situation has slowly turned into something much less certain. Back in 2018, an executive connected to Disney film production reportedly told The Hollywood Reporter that the studio was looking to bring new energy into the franchise. This wasn't random wording. It was a clear signal that they were distancing themselves from Jack Sparrow without saying his name directly. And fans didn't take it lightly. You can actually track the reaction through archived comments, fan petitions, and even trending hashtags from that time. People weren't just upset. They were confused. Because for many, Jack Sparrow wasn't just a character. He was the franchise. Then came 2022, and everything changed direction. During the highly publicized legal case involving Depp, one statement stood out more than anything else. While testifying, Depp said that even if Disney offered him $300 million and a million alpacas, he wouldn't return. This wasn't just a joke line. It was delivered under oath, in a serious setting, and it instantly became one of the most quoted moments from the trial. Major outlets like BBC News and CNN covered that statement, giving it global reach. And at that moment, it felt final. But here's the detail most people missed. After the trial ended, the tone around Depp's career began to shift quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed by people paying close attention. Appearances started increasing. Industry conversations became less tense. And most importantly, the door that seemed completely shut didn't look as locked anymore. In mid-2023, producer Jerry Bruckheimer gave an interview to Entertainment Tonight where he was asked directly about the future of Pirates. His answer was careful, but revealing. He said that they were working on multiple scripts. And when asked if Depp could return, he didn't shut it down. Instead, he said, "We'll see." Now that might sound like nothing. But in Hollywood language, that's not nothing. That's a shift from a hard no to a possible maybe. And that's where the rumors started gaining real traction. Not from random blogs, but from patterns, casting delays, script rewrites, and most importantly, the absence of any clear direction for Pirates of the Caribbean 6. Because if the studio truly had a strong plan without Jack Sparrow, it would have been visible by now. Instead, what we're seeing is hesitation. Then in early 2024, another layer was added. Reports began circulating that Disney was reconsidering its approach to legacy characters across multiple franchises. This wasn't just about Pirates. It was part of a broader strategy shift. Franchises that moved too far away from their original identity were struggling to connect with audiences. And Pirates, without Depp, is one of the clearest examples of that risk. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Insiders started hinting at what they described as relationship repair efforts. Not official negotiations, not contracts, but conversations. And while none of this has been confirmed publicly, the consistency of these reports across different entertainment journalists makes it hard to ignore. One example comes from a discussion panel covered by Variety, where industry analysts talked about how studios sometimes attempt to quietly rebuild relationships with actors after public disputes. They don't announce it. They don't confirm it. They test the waters first. And if the response is positive, then things move forward. This aligns perfectly with what fans are seeing now. No official apology from Disney, but a noticeable softening in tone. No confirmed return for Depp, but no denial either. It's a space filled with ambiguity. And in Hollywood, Ambiguity usually means something is happening behind closed doors. Another key moment that fueled speculation came when Depp himself addressed fan support during a public appearance in Europe. He didn't mention Disney directly, but he acknowledged that the character of Jack Sparrow still means a lot to him and to the audience. That's important. Because if he had completely disconnected from the role, he could have shut that down entirely. But he didn't. And then there's the business side of this story, which might be the biggest factor of all. Pirates of the Caribbean is not just a film series. It's a billion-dollar franchise. Merchandise, theme park integrations, streaming value. Everything is connected. And historically, the films featuring Depp as Jack Sparrow have been the strongest performers. That's not opinion. That's data. So now Disney is facing a very real question. Do they move forward without the one element that defined the franchise, or do they find a way to bring it back, even if it means revisiting past decisions? And this is where the idea of an apology comes in. Not necessarily a public statement with the word sorry, but something more strategic. In Hollywood, apologies often come in the form of opportunities, invitations, deals, ways to rebuild trust without addressing every detail publicly. But here's the complication. Depp's previous statement about refusing to return. That's still out there. It's documented. It was said under oath. And it sets a very clear boundary. So if there's any movement toward reconciliation, it wouldn't just require Disney to make a move. It would require Depp to reconsider his position. And that's why this situation is so unpredictable. Because both sides have something to protect. Disney has its brand image. Depp has his personal stance. And finding a middle ground between those two isn't simple. At the same time, fans are playing a bigger role than ever before. Online engagement, petitions, social media trends. These things actually influence studio decisions now. And when it comes to Pirates, the message from fans has been consistent. They want authenticity. They want continuity. And for many of them, that means Jack Sparrow. But wanting something and getting it are two different things. Because behind every major film decision, there are contracts, negotiations, and long-term planning strategies that the public never sees. And until those pieces align, everything remains in the rumor stage. Still, the fact that we're even having this conversation in 2026 says a lot. Because just a few years ago, this would have sounded impossible. The idea of Disney even being open to reconnecting with Depp would have been dismissed immediately. But now, it's being discussed seriously. And that shift didn't happen overnight. It happened through a series of small changes. Statements that left room for interpretation. Interviews that avoided clear answers. Industry conversations that hinted at possibilities instead of shutting them down. So when people ask if Disney is finally ready to apologize, the real answer might be more complex. It's not about one moment. It's about a process. A gradual movement from distance to potential collaboration. And Pirates of the Caribbean 6 sits right in the middle of that process. Because the longer the project stays undefined, the more pressure builds to make a decision that satisfies both the business side and the audience expectations. And right now, that decision hasn't been made publicly. But all the signs suggest that something is being considered. Something that wasn't on the table before. The real question isn't whether rumors are spreading. It's why they're spreading now. What changed behind the scenes that made this conversation possible again? Because in Hollywood, rumors don't just appear out of nowhere. They usually start when information begins to move, quietly, between people who know how the system works. And if you connect all these points together, the interviews, the statements, the timing, the silence, you start to see a pattern forming. Not confirmation, but definitely not coincidence either. And when you follow that pattern closely, something even more calculated starts to appear. Not just hesitation from Disney, but strategic timing. Because in this industry, timing is everything. Studios don't just revisit massive franchises randomly. They do it when market conditions, audience sentiment, and internal positioning all align. And right now, all three are quietly shifting in a direction that makes Pirates relevant again. But only if it's done right. One of the strongest indicators comes from how Disney has been handling its other legacy properties. Instead of fully replacing iconic characters, they've started blending nostalgia with new storylines. This isn't a guess. It's something discussed openly by executives during media briefings covered by Variety, where the focus was on reconnecting with core audience identity. That phrase matters because Pirates without Jack Sparrow risks losing exactly that identity. And internally, that creates pressure. Not public pressure, but boardroom pressure. Because when a franchise worth billions sits inactive for too long, it's not seen as safe. It's seen as wasted potential. And that's where the conversation shifts from should we move on to can we afford to move on? At the same time, Johnny Depp has been rebuilding his presence in a very controlled way. Not through loud blockbuster announcements, but through selective projects, public appearances, and creative work that keeps him visible without overexposing him. This matters because it changes how studios evaluate risk. A few years ago, associating with him came with uncertainty. Now, that uncertainty has reduced. Not completely gone, but significantly lower. There's also a financial angle that most casual viewers don't think about. Pirates films historically performed strongest internationally. Europe, Asia, and especially markets where Depp has maintained a strong fan base. Industry data discussed in panels referenced by The Hollywood Reporter highlights that global appeal is a key factor. And studios don't ignore global numbers. They depend on them. So when decision-makers sit down to evaluate Pirates 6, they're not just asking what story do we tell. They're asking what version of this story maximizes global engagement? And every time that question is asked, the same factor keeps coming back into the conversation. Familiarity. But familiarity alone isn't enough. Because bringing back a character like Jack Sparrow isn't just a creative decision. It's a reputational one. And this is where the idea of a quiet apology becomes more realistic than a public one. Not a press conference. Not a headline saying we were wrong. But something subtler. Like reopening communication channels, offering creative input, or restructuring a deal in a way that shows respect without directly addressing past conflict. This approach isn't new. It's actually a common industry tactic. When relationships break publicly, they're often repaired privately first. And only after everything is aligned behind the scenes does the public narrative change. Another detail that adds weight to this theory is how carefully both sides have been speaking. Or not speaking. Depp hasn't made any aggressive statements about Disney recently. And Disney hasn't made any definitive statements about excluding him either. That mutual silence isn't accidental. It creates space. And in negotiations, space is valuable. There's also the script situation. Multiple reports over the past 2 years have mentioned that Pirates 6 has gone through different versions. One reportedly focused on a new cast. Another explored a spin-off direction. And none of them moved forward into production. That kind of creative reset usually signals one thing: uncertainty at the core concept level. And when a studio can't lock the concept, it often means they're missing a key piece. Something that makes the story feel complete. And for Pirates, that missing piece is obvious to the audience. Even if the studio hasn't officially said it. Then comes the fan factor again. But this time, it's more organized. Not just random posts or comments, but consistent engagement patterns. Every time Pirates trends online, it's tied to Depp. Every time rumors appear, they spread quickly. And studios monitor that. Not casually, but through data and analytics teams that track audience interest in real time. So when you combine audience demand, financial incentive, and creative uncertainty, you get a situation where reconsidering past decisions becomes not just possible, but logical. But logic doesn't guarantee action. Because there's still one major obstacle: trust. And trust, once broken publicly, isn't easy to rebuild quietly. Both sides would need assurances. Disney would need reliability. Depp would need respect. And those aren't things you solve with a single meeting. This is where the timeline becomes important. If Pirates 6 were in active production right now, with a confirmed cast and release window, these rumors would likely be weaker. But the fact that the project is still in development gives room for change. And in Hollywood, development phases are where the biggest shifts happen. There's also a narrative advantage to waiting. If Disney were to reconnect with Depp immediately after the trial, it would have looked reactive, emotional, possibly even pressured. But by letting time pass, the context changes. It becomes a business decision instead of a response. And that distinction matters for public perception. And speaking of perception, the way media coverage has evolved is another clue. Earlier reports were definitive. Moving on, rebooting, new direction. But more recent coverage uses softer language. possibility, discussions, uncertain future. That shift in tone reflects a shift in information. Journalists don't change language randomly. They adjust based on what sources are indicating. One particularly interesting discussion highlighted by BBC News focused on how public opinion can influence long-term casting decisions. While they didn't mention pirates specifically in that segment, the principle applies directly. When audience attachment to a character is strong enough, replacing that character becomes a higher risk than keeping them. And Jack Sparrow is one of those rare characters where the actor and the role are almost inseparable. You can recast many roles, but some become too iconic to replicate without backlash. So now everything circles back to the same question. If Disney knows all of this, what's stopping them from making a move? The answer might be simpler than it looks. They're waiting for the right moment. Not just the right deal, but the right narrative. Because when this decision becomes public, it won't just be about a movie. It will be about what it represents. Redemption, reconciliation, or strategic alignment. Depending on how it's presented. And that presentation has to be controlled carefully. Too early, and it looks rushed. Too late, and the opportunity loses impact. So the timing has to feel natural. Even if it's planned. There's also the possibility that discussions are already further along than anyone realizes. In Hollywood, finalized deals can stay hidden until studios are ready to announce them. Contracts get signed, schedules get adjusted, and only then does the public find out. But even if that's not the case here, even if everything is still in early stages, the direction is clear. This isn't a closed door anymore. It's a door that's slightly open. Just enough for speculation to grow. And speculation, in this industry, often serves a purpose. It tests reactions. It builds anticipation. It creates a conversation before any official step is taken. So when people say these are just rumors, they're not wrong. But they're also not seeing the full picture. Because rumors, especially consistent ones, usually start from something real. Even if that something is still developing. And right now, all signs point to a situation that's evolving. Slowly, carefully, and very deliberately. Which brings us to the most important part of this entire story. Not what has been said, but what hasn't. No official denial. No confirmed replacement. No finalized direction. Just silence. And signals. And sometimes, in Hollywood, that combination says more than any announcement ever could. And that silence becomes even louder when you start comparing it to how studios usually behave when they are absolutely sure about a direction. Normally, when a franchise moves on from a major actor, the messaging is clear, consistent, and repeated across interviews. You see cast announcements, concept reveals, even early production leaks that confirm momentum. But here, none of that has fully locked in place. And that gap between expectation and reality is exactly where these rumors are growing. If you go back and analyze how Disney handled other franchise transitions, there's always a pattern of reinforcement. They don't leave space for doubt. They replace uncertainty with clarity as quickly as possible. But with Pirates, that clarity hasn't arrived. Instead, what we've seen is delay after delay, script revision after script revision, and carefully worded interviews that avoid giving a final answer. And when a studio avoids final answers for this long, it usually means one thing. They are still weighing options that they don't want to commit to publicly yet. Another detail that adds to this is how industry insiders talk when they are trying to hint at something without confirming it. Phrases like ongoing discussions, multiple directions, and no decision finalized are not just filler words. They are signals. And those exact signals have been repeated in coverage across outlets like The Hollywood Reporter and Variety over the past year. And if you read between the lines of those reports, there's a consistent theme. Uncertainty centered around identity. Not budget, not casting availability, not technical challenges. Identity. What is Pirates of the Caribbean without Jack Sparrow? And more importantly, will audiences accept that version? Because at the end of the day, studios don't just create films. They manage expectations. And Pirates has one of the most defined audience expectations of any modern franchise. People don't just watch it for the story. They watch it for a very specific energy, a very specific performance, a very specific character that became the face of the entire brand. And that's where the risk calculation becomes complicated. Because moving forward without Johnny Depp might protect certain internal decisions. But it also risks weakening the connection that made the franchise successful in the first place. And here's something else that often gets overlooked: timing in relation to audience memory. Franchises rely heavily on nostalgia, but nostalgia has a window. Way too long, and the emotional connection fades. Act too soon, and it feels forced. Pirates is currently sitting right in that critical window where nostalgia is still strong, but expectations are even stronger. And this is exactly why the idea of a reconciliation is gaining attention now instead of earlier. Because earlier, the situation was too fresh, too public, too complicated. But now, enough time has passed for both sides to reposition without it feeling reactive. There's also a psychological factor at play. Audience forgiveness cycles. Public perception doesn't stay fixed forever. It shifts, evolves, and often softens over time. And studios track that shift very closely. They analyze sentiment, not just headlines. And if the sentiment becomes favorable enough, decisions that once seemed impossible start to look viable again. That doesn't mean everything is resolved. It means the environment has changed. And when the environment changes, strategies change with it. One interesting example of this comes from how actors and studios have reconnected in the past after public disagreements. While every situation is different, the pattern is often similar. Distance, silence, indirect communication, and then gradual re-engagement. Not through announcements, but through small signals that build towards something larger. And right now, Pirates seems to be in that signal phase. But there's still a major variable that can't be ignored: Depp's own position. Because even if Disney is open to rebuilding the relationship, that doesn't automatically mean he is. His previous statement about not returning wasn't vague. It was clear, direct, and widely reported. And reversing a statement like that isn't just about changing your mind. It's about redefining her stance in a way that makes sense to the public. And that requires something meaningful in return. Not just financially, but symbolically. Which brings the conversation back to the idea of an apology. Not necessarily a public apology in the traditional sense, but a gesture that acknowledges what happened without turning it into a headline conflict. Something that allows both sides to move forward without reopening old narratives. Because if this turns into a public back and forth, it risks damaging the very thing both sides would be trying to rebuild: trust. And trust is the foundation of any long-term collaboration, especially in a franchise as complex as Pirates. There's also the production side to consider. Even if an agreement were reached today, bringing Pirates 6 to life would take time. Script finalization, casting alignment, scheduling, pre-production. These are not quick processes. Which means any decision being considered now is likely aimed at a future release window, not an immediate one. And that gives both sides room to plan carefully. Another layer that adds to this is how carefully controlled leaks work in Hollywood. Sometimes, information isn't officially announced. It's allowed to surface gradually. Not enough to confirm, but enough to spark conversation. And if the reaction is positive, that momentum can influence the final decision. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Consistent rumors, repeated across different platforms, gaining traction without direct confirmation. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when there's something worth testing. And the reaction so far has been strong. Every new rumor gets attention. Every hint gets analyzed. Every interview gets dissected. And that level of engagement sends a clear message. People are still invested. And investment is what drives decisions in this industry. But even with all of this, nothing is guaranteed. Because Hollywood is full of projects that almost happened. Scripts that were written, deals that were discussed, plans that were developed, and then changed at the last moment. So while the direction seems to be shifting, the outcome is still uncertain. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps this story alive. Because as long as there's no final answer, every new detail matters. Every interview, every report, every subtle change in language becomes part of the puzzle. And right now, that puzzle is still incomplete. But the pieces we do have, they're starting to form a clearer picture. A picture where the door isn't closed anymore. A picture where past decisions are being reconsidered. A picture where Pirates of the Caribbean 6 is not just about continuing a story, but about redefining what that story should be. And in that process, the biggest question isn't just whether Disney will apologize. It's whether both sides are ready to move forward in a way that actually makes sense. For the franchise, for the audience, and for everything that's happened in between. Because if they are, then what once felt impossible might quietly become reality. And if they're not, then all of this remains exactly what it is right now. A build-up without a conclusion, a possibility without confirmation, a story still waiting for its final decision. And that final decision is where everything either comes together, or falls apart completely. Because at this stage, it's no longer about rumors alone. It's about momentum. And momentum in Hollywood is a powerful force. Once it builds in a certain direction, it becomes harder to stop than to follow through. Right now, the momentum is not pointing toward a clean reboot. It's not pointing toward a fully new cast taking over the Pirates universe either. Instead, it's pointing toward something in between. Something that allows the studio to reconnect with what worked while still leaving room to evolve. And that kind of middle ground solution only works if the core element is strong enough to carry it. Which brings everything back again to Johnny Depp. Because whether people agree or disagree with the past, whether studios admit it publicly or not, his version of Jack Sparrow is still the emotional anchor of the franchise. And replacing an emotional anchor is one of the hardest things to do in long-running series. It's not just about finding another actor. It's about convincing audiences to feel the same way again. And history has shown that this rarely works when the original performance is too iconic. And Disney knows this. Not through speculation, but through measurable data. Engagement numbers, streaming performance, merchandise trends. All of these metrics tell the same story. When Jack Sparrow is present, interest increases. When he's absent, that interest becomes uncertain. So the question isn't whether Disney understands the value. The question is how they choose to act on it. And this is where strategy becomes more important than intention. Because even if the studio wants to reconnect, the way they do it will define the outcome. Handle it poorly, and it looks like a desperate move. Handle it carefully, and it becomes a powerful narrative of return. One possible path is a limited return. Not a full commitment to multiple films, but a single appearance that reintroduces the character in a controlled way. This approach reduces risk while testing audience response. And if the response is strong, it opens the door for more. Another possibility is a parallel storyline. A new cast carrying the main plot, while Jack Sparrow exists within the same world, bridging the old and the new. This allows Disney to move forward without completely letting go of the past. But both of these options depend on one thing: agreement behind the scenes. And that agreement isn't just about contracts. It's about alignment. Creative alignment, financial alignment, and most importantly, personal alignment. Because no matter how strong the business case is, if either side feels that the conditions aren't right, the deal won't happen. And that's why the silence continues. Because negotiations, if they exist, are happening in a space where everything needs to be considered carefully. Not just the film, but the message it sends. There's also the legacy factor. Pirates of the Caribbean isn't just another franchise. It's part of Disney's long-term identity. Theme parks, brand associations, global recognition. All of these elements are connected. And any major decision related to Pirates affects more than just one movie. So when people ask why this is taking so long, this is why. Because the stakes are high. And high-stakes decisions are never rushed. Another interesting angle to look at is how other studios have handled similar situations. When the central actor leaves a major franchise, there are usually three outcomes: recasting, rebooting, or reconciliation. And out of those three, reconciliation is often the most difficult, but also the most rewarding if done correctly. Because it taps into something deeper than just storytelling. It taps into audience emotion. And Pirates has always been driven by emotion as much as spectacle. So if Disney can find a way to bring that emotion back, the impact could be significant. But again, it all depends on execution. Because audiences today are more aware than ever. They can sense when something is genuine, and when something is purely strategic. And if this move feels forced, it could backfire. That's why the approach needs to feel natural. Not like a correction, but like a continuation. And creating that feeling requires careful planning. It requires timing announcements in a way that builds excitement instead of skepticism. It requires shaping the narrative so that it feels like the next step, not a reversal. And most importantly, It requires both sides to be fully committed because anything less will show. And when it shows, audiences notice. And when audiences notice, reactions change. And when reactions change, the entire strategy can collapse. So every step from this point forward matters. Every statement, every interview, every hint. Because all of it contributes to how the final decision will be received. And right now, everything is still being positioned. Nothing has been locked in publicly. Nothing has been confirmed. But nothing has been denied either. And that's the space where the biggest shifts usually happen. Quietly. Without headlines. Without announcements. Until suddenly, everything changes at once. And when that moment comes, it won't feel like a random decision. It will feel like something that's been building for a long time. Because that's exactly what it is. A slow build. A careful shift. A situation evolving step by step until it reaches a point where staying the same is no longer the best option. And if that point has already been reached behind the scenes, then what we're seeing right now is not the beginning of the story. It's the final phase before the reveal. Because in Hollywood, the biggest moves aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones you don't fully see coming until they're already happening. And when something finally shifts from behind the scenes to the public eye, it never happens without intention. Every word, every frame, every announcement is calculated. And if a reveal involving Johnny Depp and Disney ever happens, it won't be random. It will be structured in a way that controls the narrative from the very first second. Because the studio understands something very clearly. This isn't just about bringing back a character. It's about rewriting perception. And perception, once shaped in a certain direction, needs a strong and believable moment to change course. That moment could come in different forms. It could be a carefully worded statement that focuses on moving forward instead of looking back. It could be an official casting confirmation that speaks louder than any apology ever could. Or it could be something even more subtle. Like a teaser, a symbol, a familiar voice that instantly tells the audience what's happening without saying it directly. And if you look at how Disney has handled major reveals in the past, especially for legacy properties, they prefer impact over explanation. They don't overtalk the decision. They show it. And that's important here. Because explaining too much risks reopening old conversations. But showing something new allows the focus to shift naturally. And right now, everything seems to be building toward that kind of moment. Not confirmed, but structured. Another detail that makes this situation different from typical casting rumors is how long it has stayed active without fading. Most rumors lose momentum quickly if there's no substance behind them. They spike, they circulate, and then they disappear. But this one hasn't followed the pattern. It keeps coming back, evolving each time, gaining new angles, new discussions, new interpretations. And that persistence usually means there's something keeping it alive. Something that hasn't been resolved yet. And when something isn't resolved, it continues to generate attention. Because people are trying to understand where it's going. And right now, there are only two clear outcomes. Either Disney fully moves forward without Depp and finally locks that decision publicly. Or they find a way to bring him back and redefine the direction of the franchise. Staying in between for too long isn't sustainable. Because uncertainty can hold attention. But it can't carry a project into production. Sooner or later, a decision has to be made. And when that decision is made, it will answer more than just one question. It will answer whether studios are willing to revisit past decisions when audience demand stays strong enough. It will answer whether long-term franchise identity matters more than short-term positioning. And it will answer whether reconciliation at this level is actually possible in today's industry. But until that moment arrives, everything we're seeing remains part of a build-up shaped by silence, signals, and shifting narratives. And the most interesting part of this build-up is how both sides have avoided closing the door completely. Because closing the door is easy. It's definitive. It ends speculation. But leaving it slightly open, that's a choice. A strategic choice. And that choice is what keeps this entire situation alive. Because as long as the door is open, even just a little, the possibility exists. And in Hollywood, possibility is often the first step toward reality. But here's the part that changes how you look at everything. What if this isn't just about Pirates of the Caribbean 6? What if this is about something bigger? A long-term shift in how studios handle controversy, public pressure, and legacy talent? Because if Disney finds a way to navigate this situation successfully, it sets a precedent. It shows that even after public separation, even after strong statements, even after years of distance, There is still a path back if the conditions are right. And that kind of precedent doesn't just affect one franchise. It affects the entire industry. Because other studios watch closely. They analyze what works, what doesn't, and how audiences respond. And if this works, if bringing back Depp creates a strong positive reaction, it could influence similar decisions elsewhere. But if it fails, if the reaction is divided or negative, it becomes a warning instead. So this isn't just a creative decision. It's a strategic test. And tests like this are never taken lightly. They are planned, measured, and executed with precision. And that's exactly why nothing has been rushed. Because rushing increases risk. And risk at this level isn't just about money. It's about brand. And brand, once affected, takes years to rebuild. So everything is being handled carefully. Every possibility is being considered. Every outcome is being evaluated. And until the balance feels right, nothing moves forward publicly. But the fact that we've reached this point, where the conversation has shifted from impossible to possible, already tells you that something has changed. Something behind the scenes. Something that hasn't been fully revealed yet. And when that reveal finally happens, it won't just answer the question people have been asking. It will redefine the story that led up to it. Because in the end, this isn't just about whether Disney will apologize. It's about whether both sides are ready to turn a complicated past into a controlled future. And that decision, whenever it's made, will be the moment where speculation ends and reality begins. If you followed every twist in this story, then you already know this isn't just about one movie. It's about a decision that could change everything for this franchise. So now I want to hear your take. Should Disney bring back Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, or is it time for a completely new direction? Drop your opinion below because this debate is far from over. And if you want more real, no-noise breakdowns like this, make sure you stay connected. Because the moment something official drops, you'll want to see it first.